Hello and welcome to the Teaching Best Practices for Online and Hybrid Courses, How Your Home Internet Works portion of our series. There is also How the Internet Works video, which you can view in conjunction with this to get a more complete understanding of how requests go from one end to the other when you are working, teaching, or doing anything from home. First, I'm going to start with how you get help with your home internet, and then we'll start to talk about how it actually works in more detail. This session, much like the How the Internet Works session, is a basic level session to help you understand how when you click on something, things go from point A to point B to point C and so on, and then back to you in the end. There are some technical terms that are discussed here, and I do my best to explain them and address them without getting too deep into the weeds for you. So we'll start with how you get help and how you figure out, hey, where is the problem with my internet connection or my device or the internet itself or the application that I'm trying to use. First thing you can try is to ping Google's DNS servers. This is a good indication to see if you have an internet connection that is functional at all, honestly. To ping this, Google, what ping does is ping sends one packet to the destination, which in this case is the internet address 8.8.8.8, and then waits for it to come back. If it comes back, it'll tell you how fast it came back and show you that you can indeed send and receive data on the internet at the most basic level that you can try from home. To do this, you're going to want to click Start, then click on Run, and type the letters C as in Charlie, M as in Mary, D as in dog, which are short for command. You can also type command. And then you're going to get a black box to which you will type ping 8.8.8.8 and hit enter. This will send 4 consecutive packets to the Google DNS address. We use Google's DNS because we know it is generally available. It is almost never offline. So it is one of the most reliable set of servers to send the packet to. If you send a ping to 8.8.8.8 and you do not get 4 back, you have a connectivity issue. And that could be in various different places, and we'll talk about that along the way. You can also run a speed test. Running a speed test requires you to open a web browser and go to https://speedtest.net and then click go. What that's going to do is that is going to do something not too similar to what the ping test does, but in a larger way. It actually sends a file to a server out on the network on the internet that it chooses, and then takes the time to figure out how long that it gets there, and then downloads a file and figures out how long it takes to get back to you and can give you a relative speed. So for example, if you're paying for 100 megabytes worth of bandwidth from your internet service provider, your ISP, and you run a speed test and you're only getting 5, well, that could be a problem. 5 isn't good anyway. So that's another way to test and see what's going on. Now again, much like the ping test, the problem could be in various different places, and we'll talk about that. You can also restart your computer and try another device if you're having issues with the ping or the speed test. It never hurts. And it fixes a lot of other different problems too. Know how your own home network works. And that is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about how home networks work. Very important to know how your home network works when you're having issues with your application, whether it's running iFit for your treadmill, whether it's Teams for your class, or accessing Canvas for your class, or anything else like that. Have your ISP, your internet service provider's app, on your mobile device and their support phone number on your mobile device. It is super important to be able to have something outside of your computer to check and see what's going on. Generally speaking, your ISP's app, whether it's in iOS or Android, will tell you if they are aware that there is an issue on their network. And we'll talk about their network briefly as we talk about how your home network works as well. But it's super important to be able to tap Go in and see, hey, they know there's a trouble ticket in your neighborhood and they're working on it. Or they don't know if there's any problems. They think everything's fine. And then if you've done a speed test and you've done a ping test, you've restarted your computer and you're pretty sure at this point it's not your home network, you might want to call them because maybe there's a problem they don't know about yet. Have your organization's tech support on your phone. So what this means is whatever you're trying to access, the people who support that. So in a school scenario, that could be your internal IT department or help desk phone number. It could be your whoever supports the specific application. For example, we have specific support people for Canvas as opposed to Microsoft Teams or Google or any of those other things. If you are trying to do something like a workout on your treadmill through iFit, have their phone number on your phone too. That way you can get in touch with someone who is technically adept at troubleshooting issues from all angles and knows all the issues. And they may even know of an issue with the application you're trying to use. For example, if you're trying to use Microsoft Teams or OneDrive, Microsoft sends out alerts to administrators to let them know, hey, we're having a problem, and your tech support department should be able to check on those things to see if you can't sign into Teams because of an issue on Microsoft's side, at least that they're aware of. Now let's go over a little bit about what we're going to talk about when we talk about how your home internet works, and then we'll get to drawing it out in a more visual way. Your home internet is one small network attached to other networks via your ISP. ISP stands for your Internet Service Provider, as I mentioned on the previous slide. So think about it like a bunch of trees, and your Internet Service Provider is a forest that connects to other forests. Your Internet Service Provider connects upstream to either another network or sometimes directly to what we call the internet backbone. And that depends on your internet service provider. Your internet service provider could be Comcast. For instance, I have Comcast Xfinity at my home. Could be Verizon, it could be Penn Teledata, Cox Communications, AT&T, RCN, or any number of providers. However, not all providers are what are considered tier 1 providers that have a direct uplink to the internet. For example, Windstream is not a tier 1 provider. They connect up through another provider when it comes time to actually connect to the internet. You pay for 100 megabytes. Why you never get 100 megabytes? Well, there's two sides to this. One, generally speaking, when you sign up for internet service, there's little words at the bottom that say up to. So if you pay for 100 megabytes, you're likely paying for up to 100, not 100. The second part of that is why you never get 100. The reason for that is that those numbers are theoretical based on formulas and math, and those things don't take into account all of the little things that can impact your internet bandwidth performance. So when we think about that, we think about interference. For example, do you have your router close to a microwave oven? That's going to interfere with the quality of your signal and your bandwidth. Is there somewhere along the route of your bandwidth, of your traffic, near electrical transformers? Well, electrical transformers interfere with the signaling on cabling. Is all of your cabling insulated? If it's not insulated, it is also likely to be getting interference. And all of those things reduce the ability of the signal to go from point A to point B. And those are reasons why you're not getting the bandwidth that you think you're paying for. Another reason, and we'll get into that as we draw it out in a few minutes, is that you share bandwidth with others. It is not yours. So that's the difference between up to and guaranteed. If you sign up for a business connection at your home, generally speaking, they guarantee you that bandwidth, or at least close to it. As I mentioned a moment ago, you share your bandwidth. Your home bandwidth is dependent on what your neighbors are doing. And when we draw it out, it'll become a little bit more clear. But for example, from your internet service provider, the traffic goes to a router. And then that router generally connects to another router, which connects to a series of neighborhoods. And those routers only have the amount of bandwidth available to them that they have, and you all share it. And they do not have 4.8 gigabytes of data per router, even if they're guaranteeing 4.8 gigabytes of data to all the customers. Your ISP also places rules on your connection that limit you. So for example, you'll notice that if you run the speed test that I mentioned in the previous slide, your download speed should be significantly higher than your upload speed. That is because your internet service provider is limiting the amount of data you can send back to the internet. And that's not normally a problem, because generally speaking, the data you send out is very small and very quick, and you generally consume a lot more data than you send up. When you're on a web browser and you click on a link, you're sending something out of your home to the internet, and then it is sending back a lot more data based on that request. The only time this can become an issue is when you're doing video calling or streaming video from your home. When you go to YouTube and you stream a video to your students, that is not coming from your home. That is coming from YouTube. However, your camera connection is coming from your home. Your student's camera connection, that is coming from their home. So if you have, say, 3 students online at the same time in one home, all doing the same thing, that can impact the performance of all of them altogether. In addition to that, they may also limit other kinds of traffic that you have coming out of your home. They may say that you can stream video from a video application, but if you try and stream a movie out of your home, they may limit your ability to do that. How does your Wi-Fi really work in your home? And we're going to talk more as we draw that out. But we're going to try and get to how Wi-Fi works on a semi-technical level, talk about radio frequencies a little bit. And here we see 2.45 gigahertz. I just brought that up. Those are radio frequencies because Wi-Fi is really just a radio, just like in your car. We also talk about how speed works, and we talk about speed and coverage. That's 802.11, 802.11 AC. You see that on the boxes or on stickers on your computer, things like that. We'll talk a little bit more depth as to what those mean and why it matters, because you're going to want to know that in relation to where you put the router in your home, and then how those routers work. Those are very important things to understand. So now we are going to jump out of our happy little slides and over to my whiteboard. All right. So here on my whiteboard, I've already pre-drawn some things, and if you watch the How the Internet Works video, you see I don't pre-draw anything in that one. I drew all that live, and that's the app and the I. So the I is the internet. Well, the app represents the application you are trying to access on the internet, whether it be Teams, whether it be Google's G Suite, whether it be iFit, whether it be anything that you're trying to get to, could be eBay, whatever. So that is represented here in the upper left corner by the application. So the application, you see in this green line, then hits the internet, which is our blue eye, and the internet is represented by cloud. Why? Because cloud is cloud. It then shoots over to your ISP. So here's our connection. So the internet goes back and forth here and here between your ISP and the internet based on the requests made. At that point, your ISP then connects down to a router. As I mentioned before, I'm going to simplify it. Let's say it's one router. It could be multiple routers. One of the things we like to see in our ping tests, there's another test called trace route that we can run, is how many hops does it take to get to where you're trying to go. In our illustration here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different connections as we go from here to here to here. And all of these connections, the ends, we go from the router, this hop, router N is N1, N2 is N1 is neighborhood 1, N2 is neighborhood 2, N3 is neighborhood 3. So as we look at that, and we'll pretend for a minute that your home is in neighborhood 3 for simplicity of drawing lines. But remember, all of your other neighbors are here as well. Get off that neighborhood 3 router. And neighborhood 2 and neighborhood 1 have the exact same connection. So this router, for argument's sake, let's say, is a really good one and has 100 gigabit of data that it can traverse back up to the internet service provider. And these numbers are important to illustrate something down the line a little bit. And let's say that your ISP is really good and it gives your neighborhoods 100 gigabits as well, which should be enough to handle your neighborhood. But it's also giving them 100 and it's giving them 100. So you can see right here, right off the bat, I've got a problem because these three are capable of 300 gigabits, while this is only 100 gigabits. So potentially, there's what we call a bottleneck. If we max out all 3 neighborhoods, there's going to be some slowness on the network for all 3 neighborhoods, not just yours, as it fights to go between what it is that you're trying to get to as opposed to your neighbors. So if your neighborhood is big on Xbox, well, they're fighting for bandwidth just as you're fighting for bandwidth on your Zoom. So if I move this here and we focus a little more on the home. So let's say your home, you're paying for 100 megabits. So just using that, it's a nice round number, easy to calculate. The first thing you want to know when you look at that 100 number is how many devices do you have on your network and where to put my router. So I drew a little house here, and most people are going to put the router wherever their cable connection comes in the house. So if you're lucky, this N3 router connects to your home via fiber optic cabling. So we'll write fiber optic here. So wherever that comes into your home, your cable company has generally within your home put that somewhere. And let's say this is where it is in your living room. So this connection connects right into here, comes out of the ground, hopefully it's not above the ground. And we're going to put our Wi-Fi router here. Now this is where some of those other things I discussed start to come into play. And those things, we're going to write our 802.11n and 802.11ac, and then we'll write 2.4 gigahertz down here and 5 gigahertz. Okay. So we have our Wi-Fi router, and the first thing you want to know about your Wi-Fi router is which of these does it support. Hopefully, if you buy a really nice router, you spend about $100, $150, you're going to get a router that supports 2.4 and 5 gigahertz and 802.11ac. Generally speaking, routers are going to be downward compatible. As far as capability, speed, coverage goes, N is older than AC. So AC is faster and more capable, whereas N is a little bit slower and does not cover quite as well as AC will. So when we talk about coverage, your router, this is important because we've put it in the corner of our home. So when we talk about coverage, we are talking about how well the router itself reaches, say, this part of your home. Now, you're never going to sit in the upper left corner, but your router could be capable of sending signals in multiple ways. So what I mean by that is most routers that you buy at the store are going to cover like such. So you can see the signal is going to come out like this. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's just a radio frequency signal. And then at some point, this signal starts to degrade a little bit. And it becomes a little bit less effective as it comes out until it's too weak to really be effective. Now, your N is not as good at coverage as your AC is. So your AC is going to cover better. And then we'll talk about, and it's also faster. So when we talk about speed versus bandwidth, they're not always the same thing. So speed is how fast you can go from point A to point B. Bandwidth, and when we talk about bandwidth, that's what we're talking about 100 gigabytes or 100 megabytes and all those things. That is how much you can send at a given speed. And based on how much bandwidth you're using, how wide your packet sending is, your speed will vary. Okay, so think about it like a car, where if you have a Corvette, which is small and powerful, and if you put the same engine in a truck, which is now big and powerful, well, the Corvette can go faster than the truck, even though they're both about the same size, but the weight is way different and it distributes differently. And therefore, the truck does not get where it's going as fast as the Corvette does. However, they can both drive on the same road. So it's kind of like that when we talk about bandwidth and the 100 megabyte number. Speed is more, when we run the ping test, you'll notice milliseconds. It talks in milliseconds. That's almost more like what we're talking about. Although when you look at N versus AC, they're going to throw numbers out like 300 megabytes, 500 megabytes, 1 gigabyte, 10 gigabytes of speed. That's all very relative. Because another thing to keep in mind, when we go back to these signal lines that I drew here, it's just like a radio in your car. There are different things in your home that are going to affect how this signal works. So other radios are a big one. Other radios are going to reduce the effectiveness of this radio right here. So you want to minimize other radios. So when we think about other radios, you want to ask yourself, do I have, say, a home security system that does its own wireless thing? Well, it does. You might need to know how it does it. And when we talk about that, now we're really interested in our gigahertz conversation. So 2.4 versus 5, they are different frequency ranges, just like in your radio. If you've connected 93.3 on the radio, that is a radio frequency band, or in a band of radio frequency. 2.4 gigahertz and 5 are different bands of radio frequency. 2.4 gigahertz has a total of 13 channels. So your 93.3 is a channel, but of those, usually 9 are usable. And there's various reasons why you can only use 9. Each device in your home is going to use a channel. 5 gigahertz is capable of hundreds of channels. So this is really important because a lot of the things like a security system, or for example, I have my garage opener connects to my wireless. My garage opener is only capable of 2.4 gigahertz. Well, I now only have 8 channels in the 2.4 gigahertz range that I can use in my home. Your Apple devices, so if you have an iPhone or iPads, they want very desperately to connect at 5 gigahertz because Apple knows that that is the best frequency range to connect at and the best way to get open frequencies and channels to work with. So you want to look and say, well, what is my device using and how many devices in my home are locked to 2.4 and how many of them are actually capable of 5? Because a 5 gigahertz device, generally speaking, is going to want to use the 5 gigahertz. And that's going to give you the best wireless connection possible. Now, when you look at that, you then have to say, how many wireless devices can I support? Your Apple, your iPad, your iPhones, they are going to take as much bandwidth as they can, whereas your computers, your Dells, your HPs, things like that, are only going to take what they need. You want them all at 5 gigahertz because that's the best possible connection in the cleanest place, because if you run out of channels in this range, your devices will not work. However, you also have to be aware that I can now connect hundreds to my 5 gigahertz radio, but my router may not be capable of supporting that. So it may only be capable of supporting 10 to 25 devices, which is pretty average. It's a pretty average home router is about 10 to 25 devices. And that allows the router itself to do its job the best that it can and route that traffic out of your home and out to the internet. So we've talked a little bit about several different layers of how these things work, how they connect, and how they talk back and forth. One thing to note is you should know how to connect to your router statistics to look and see how many devices are connected at one time. If you have Comcast or any of the big guys like Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, they will generally give you an app that will show you, here's how many devices are connected in your home. If you have more than 20, 25 devices, your router may be overworked at that point. And it may not matter how much bandwidth you have going out or how much bandwidth your neighborhood has, because your router may not be able to support that. And there are ways to combat that. You can get a separate Wi-Fi router, which then takes some of the load off of your internet service provider router that they gave you. That is one way to do that. You can get more bandwidth. It'll help to a degree because it'll give your router a little bit less to do. And those are a couple things you can do. You can also split up between these two channels, the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz, because what that'll do is that'll break up how quickly requests are made of your router. Those are a couple of things you can try. So in your home, when we look at these devices and all of these cool things like 802.11n, 5 gigahertz, what it comes down to is how many devices you have connecting at once, what those devices are asking of your router here, and then what your neighborhood router here can support as it goes up to this router here and asks for more bandwidth from it. You are still quite likely, if things are slow, at any of these points, there could be a bottleneck as far as how much bandwidth is available. And you can find that out, again, by going back to that speed test that I suggested earlier and running the speed test to see, hey, am I getting the bandwidth I usually get? Or is it lower than usual and making it look like that I'm fighting for bandwidth? And what a good thing to do is just run those speed tests periodically. Go on in, run one, run another one an hour later, run it at dinner time, run it before you go to bed, run it when you wake up in the morning. That way you can get a feel for what your internet looks like across, over different times. So if you're sitting down and you're hopping in a Zoom or you're hopping in a Teams meeting and all of a sudden it's getting wonky on you, you can now go in, run a speed test and go, wait, I'm only getting 10 megabits. I usually get 85 or at this time of day. That will help you a lot when it comes time to getting the best help that you can get at any given time. Another thing to seriously consider is what kind of device you are on. So for example, if you're on a tablet, they're going to have very different capabilities than a computer will have as far as how well it can send and receive data and how well it can cache the data. So what caching is your device setting aside a certain amount of data ahead of where you are. It could be 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds worth. And your device's capability to do that is dependent on whether it's a computer or a tablet. So your tablet's going to be less capable of doing that than, say, your computer is. And that may cause you to have some sluggishness and slowness if your device is either faster or slower than your internet is at that. I really hope this was helpful for you. And please feel free to comment below and ask any questions. I'm happy to follow up. I hope I covered as much as I could here and helped out Have a great day.